The locksmith just finished changing the locks on my childhood home today. The sharp, definitive click-clack echoing in the crisp Ohio afternoon, a sound that reverberated with both grim finality and a fragile sense of beginning. The person I just handed the official, legally watertight 7-day eviction notice to, her face a mask of stunned disbelief, rapidly curdling into venomous rage, wasn't some faceless tenant who'd trashed the place or a stranger caught in the impersonal gears of foreclosure. It was my own mother, Brenda Chen, standing shaky but defiant on the porch of the house, built sweat equity, strong by my father's own hands. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 38 years old, and this house, this unassuming 2-story clapboard structure on Elm Street in Maple Creek, Ohio, isn't just an asset on a spreadsheet. It's the archive of my entire existence before I flew the nest. My father, Daniel Chen, a carpenter, whose hands were perpetually rough with sawdust, but whose touch was surprisingly gentle, built it himself in the late 70s, before I was even a glimmer in his eye. He didn't just follow blueprints, he poured his quiet integrity and meticulous skill into every joint, every beam, every perfectly mitered corner. I remember the specific scent of pine and varnish that always clung faintly to him, drifting up from his basement workshop. I can still conjure the worn smoothness of the solid oak banister he pretended to scold me for sliding down, the familiar third-step squeak on the staircase that announced my comings and goings, the exact way the morning sun slanted through the bay window in the kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air as I sat curled on the built-in window seat, lost in library books. It's where he painstakingly untangled the mysteries of fractions for me at the heavy kitchen table he also built, the one scarred with years of homework, spilled milk, and family dinners. It's where his steady hand on the back of my bicycle seat finally gave me the confidence to pedal solo down this very driveway, wobbling but free. His quiet, grounding presence permeated these walls, a comforting weight long after his actual voice fell silent. He was ripped from our lives 10 years ago by a sudden, massive heart attack that left a crater in my world and Mom seemingly adrift. This house became his most tangible legacy, the steadfast physical proof of his life and labor, the only place on earth that felt like an unbreakable anchor in the turbulent seas of adulthood. It was far more than property. It was the vessel holding the essence of his love, his dedication, his quiet strength. And Brenda Chen, the woman who gave birth to me, the grieving widow I naively assumed, shared my reverence for this place, the mother whose word I trusted without question, even when separated by continents and oceans, sold that legacy, cashed it in like a winning lottery ticket found in a dead man's coat pocket. She did it while I was immersed in the demanding, often chaotic environment of rural Vietnam, managing a shelter-build international project dedicated to providing displaced families with the very thing she was treating so callously, a safe, stable foundation. Some observers, hearing only the bare facts, might label what I did next, meticulously uncovering her deceit, strategically maneuvering through shell corporations to buy the house back from under her nose, and then serving her with this legally sanctioned, brutally short eviction notice, as cold, unnatural, even monstrously unforgiving. I call it reclaiming what's rightfully, sacredly mine. I call it the painful but necessary surgery required to excise a betrayal this profound before it poisoned my entire life. My role as a senior project manager for Shelter Build International is grueling, consuming, but deeply aligned with my values. It necessitates long-term deployments, often to regions grappling with poverty, disaster recovery, or inadequate infrastructure. For the preceding 18 months, my base had been near Da Nang, Vietnam. My project involved overseeing the construction of several structurally reinforced schools in remote mountain villages, communities frequently devastated by seasonal landslides during the intense monsoon season. The work was all-encompassing. Endless days under a relentless sun or torrential rain, navigating intricate local politics and cultural nuances, wrestling with nightmarish supply chain logistics, enduring frustratingly common power outages that crippled communication, and bearing the constant heavy weight of responsibility for the safety and well-being of the communities we served. The sheer physical distance from Maple Creek was a persistent ache, the 11-hour time difference a constant barrier to easy connection, but the mental image of my father's house, solid, unchanging, waiting for my return. That was my private sanctuary, the quiet, orderly space I retreated to in my mind during sleepless, humid nights under a mosquito net, dreaming of cool Ohio air and the scent of Dad's workshop. My mother, Brenda, lived there alone after Dad's passing, or so I firmly believed. My younger brother, Michael, now 32, seemed perpetually adrift, bouncing between unfulfilling, low-paying jobs and residing in a cramped, cheap apartment in the neighboring town. He lacked my father's quiet work ethic and seemed constitutionally allergic to responsibility. I strongly suspected, though Mom always made excuses for him, he's just finding his way, he has bad luck with jobs, that he still relied on her heavily for financial loans that magically never needed repayment. He'd appear for Sunday dinners when convenient, might grudgingly mow the lawn if the neighbors started complaining, but he shouldered none of the real burden of maintaining the aging house or providing genuine emotional support for Mom. That role, unspoken but understood, fell to me, the capable daughter making good money overseas. And so it felt not just natural, but right, for me to send a significant portion of my salary home faithfully every single month via automatic bank transfer. It was more than enough to comfortably cover the original mortgage payments, which I assumed, based on Dad's prudence, must be nearly paid off after all these years. The escalating property taxes, homeowners insurance, all utilities, plus a generous supplementary amount intended for Mom's personal expenses and any necessary household repairs or preventative maintenance. We never explicitly discussed it as rent or financial support. It was just the unquestioned arrangement, the bedrock of our long-distance relationship. The responsible, successful daughter ensuring her widowed mother lived securely, and the cherished family home, Dad's enduring monument, was properly preserved. I granted her complete autonomy with the funds, assuming her grief mirrored my own reverence for the place. The idea that she could or would betray that profound trust, betray Dad's memory in such a fundamental way, was simply outside the realm of my comprehension. She was my mother, my first home, my remaining link to the past. The first year or so of my Vietnam deployment unfolded as expected, professionally intense but personally stable, anchored by those calls home. The weekly video chats with Mom, however brief or interrupted by sputtering internet, were my cherished ritual, my dose of normalcy. She'd recount the familiar rhythms of Maple Creek life, Mrs. Henderson's ongoing battle with aphids on her prize-winning roses, the town council's endless debate over funding for the library renovation, Michael's latest fleeting enthusiasm for selling artisanal dog biscuits online. She always sounded fine, perhaps a touch lonely, occasionally complaining about minor aches or boredom, but fundamentally okay. Then, subtly at first, almost imperceptibly, beginning maybe 6 or 7 months before the implosion, the cadence shifted. The calls became less frequent, often rescheduled with increasingly flimsy excuses, texted at the last minute. "Terrible headache tonight, sweetie. Need to lie down." Or, "The internet connection is just impossible today." Or, "Feeling completely worn out for some reason." When we did manage to connect, her usual easy chatter felt different, strained, almost rehearsed. My specific, practical questions about the house, the things Dad always stayed on top of, the things I now felt responsible for overseeing from afar, were met with increasing vagueness, impatience, even irritation. "Did you get someone to look at that rattling window pane in the den like we talked about, Mom?" "Oh, that. Yes, yes, all taken care of, honey. Stop fussing. Did you remember to get the chimney swept before winter? Honestly, Sarah, it's fine. Don't you worry your pretty little head about boring old house stuff. You have much more important things to think about. Are you sure the basement isn't damp after those heavy rains? For heaven's sake, Sarah, stop interrogating me. Everything here is perfectly under control. Buried under a mountain of project reports, battling my own unreliable connectivity issues, worn down by the constant demands of my job, and admittedly desperately wanting to believe her reassurances, I allowed myself to rationalize her evasiveness. Maybe she was just stressed about managing the house alone. Maybe she felt I was micromanaging her, treating her like a child from halfway around the world. Maybe she genuinely didn't want to burden me with minor repairs when I was dealing with building schools in landslide zones. I consciously pushed down the insistent, niggling sense of unease, labeling it anxiety or homesickness. I chose willful ignorance, a decision that would soon feel catastrophically naive. The email that finally irrevocably shattered that self-imposed illusion arrived like a digital hand grenade lobbed into my precarious peace on a sweltering Tuesday morning in Hanoi. I was squinting at my laptop screen over a cup of lukewarm instant coffee, mentally prepping for a critical negotiation with local construction suppliers. It wasn't from Mom. It wasn't from Michael. It was from dear, unassuming Mrs. Gable, our elderly, eagle-eyed next-door neighbor, a woman whose comforting presence had been a constant on Elm Street for my entire life. Her typing was, as always, endearingly erratic, a charming mix of typos and folksy observations. But her message, infused with unmistakable, genuine neighborly concern, landed with the devastating force of a physical blow. "Dear Sarah," it began, her familiar digital voice suddenly sounding ominous. "Hope things are okay with you over there in that far-off place. Been meaning to write, dear. Something feels, well, off over here at your house. Saw those official-looking real estate people showing folks around a few weeks back, the ones with the shiny shoes and the clipboards. Thought maybe Brenda was just getting an idea of value. Lots of folks do that. But then last week, Sarah saw a smaller kind of truck. Not a big Mayflower moving van, but definitely a truck, backed into the driveway. They were taking some things away. Looked like older furniture from the garage, maybe some boxes. Hard to tell for sure. Haven't seen Brenda out fussing with her petunias like usual this past week or two. And the lights seem to be off more often than not at night lately, which isn't like her. She seems, well, almost secretive when I waved hello yesterday. Rushed right inside. Maybe she's getting ready to take a trip. Or maybe she's not feeling well. Just had a funny feeling in my gut, dear. Didn't want to bother you with neighborhood gossip, but thought you ought to know. Hope she's all right. Thinking of you and praying for your safety." Martha Gable Realtors confirmed. A truck taking some things away, Brenda acting secretive, lights off. The vague unease I'd been suppressing erupted into full-blown, ice-cold dread. This wasn't just Mom spring cleaning or planning a vacation. This felt calculated, hidden, fundamentally wrong. My breath hitched. I read the email again, then a third time, my mind racing, desperately trying to assemble the pieces into a picture that wasn't terrifying. Maybe she was just storing some things? Maybe Michael was finally moving out on his own and taking some old furniture? The rationalizations felt thin, pathetic, even as I grasped at them. Panic began its insidious crawl up my throat, sharp and suffocating. I immediately excused myself from my pending meeting, mumbling something about a family emergency, and retreated to the shaky privacy of my small room. I tried calling Mom, straight to the cheerful, now utterly mocking voicemail message she'd recorded years ago with Dad laughing in the background. The sound was a fresai. My hands shaking uncontrollably now, I called Michael. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep or perhaps feigned ignorance. "Mike, what the hell is going on? Mrs. Gable saw realtors weeks ago, and now she saw a truck taking things away from the house. Mom's not answering. Tell me what's happening right now." "Whoa, Sarah, calm down, geez," he mumbled. Instantly defensive, the classic tell. A truck? What truck? Seriously, I don't know. Maybe she hired 1-800-GOT-JUNK or something. She was talking about clearing out the garage. And realtors? Look, maybe she was just curious about the value, okay? People do that all the time. It doesn't mean anything. His voice lacked any conviction. He sounded like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar trying to talk his way out of it. "Don't you dare lie to me, Michael," I snapped, my voice trembling with a volatile mix of panic and fury. "Is Mom planning on selling the house? Has she already sold it? Where is she taking things? Is she moving? Tell me the truth." He stammered, backpedaling furiously, talking in circles about Mom feeling overwhelmed by the upkeep, maybe thinking about downsizing someday, getting some ideas about smaller places, just exploring options. His inability to give a single straight answer was the answer itself. He knew. He absolutely knew something catastrophic was happening, or had already happened, and he was covering for her. It took hours, agonizing hours of unanswered calls and increasingly desperate texts that were read but ignored while I tried and failed to focus on my critical work responsibilities before Mom finally picked up her phone late that evening, Ohio time. Her voice, when she answered, was coated in a thick, cloying layer of forced sweetness that made my stomach churn. "Sarah, honey, how wonderful to hear your voice. Is everything all right over there?" "Mom, stop it," I said flatly, the emotional exhaustion momentarily overriding the fury. The static crackle on the long-distance line felt like a physical manifestation of the chasm that had just opened between us. "Mrs. Gable saw realtors weeks ago. She saw a truck taking things away last week. You're hiding something enormous. What did you do to Dad's house?" The fake cheer dissolved instantly. The line went utterly silent for a long moment, filled only by the hiss and pop of the intercontinental connection. Then came the sounds, not the calculated, manipulative sobs from previous evasions, but harsh, ragged gasps of someone truly cornered, someone whose carefully constructed world was imploding. "Oh, Sarah, oh God, it's done. I sold it. Weeks ago. I had to. I truly had no other choice. Sold it." The words, now confirmed, landed with the brutal finality of a judge's gavel. "Sold Dad's house?" My voice trembled, cracking on his name. "How could you? How could you? When? To who? Why didn't you breathe a single word to me?" The questions tumbled out, choked with a grief that felt sharper, somehow, than when Dad himself had died. This felt like losing him all over again through her deliberate betrayal. Her explanation, when it finally came between wrenching, self-pitying sobs, was a convoluted, blame-shifting mess. Crushing secret debt she'd hidden for years. The story morphed slightly again. Now it was partly due to a can't-miss online investment scheme a friend recommended, partly bailing Michael out of yet another financial jam involving a car loan, partly just the relentless cost of living outpacing her means. "The house," she wailed, suddenly became an unbearable burden, too expensive to maintain, conveniently ignoring the substantial funds I sent monthly, too full of painful memories, selectively erasing decades of happy ones, too big and echoing with loneliness now that she was all alone, ignoring my constant attempts at connection. She claimed she'd sold it weeks ago in a quick private cash deal to an investment company she found online. They'd made an offer she couldn't refuse, given her desperation. She hadn't moved out yet, she admitted reluctantly when I pressed her, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, because she was still looking for the perfect little apartment, and the buyers, bless their hearts, didn't mind her staying on for a little while longer while she got her affairs in order. They were actually very understanding and kind about the whole situation, she sniffled, a statement that pinged every alarm bell in my head as utterly false. Investment flippers aren't known for their kindness. Then came the inevitable attempt to drag me into her narrative of victimhood. "I didn't want to burden you with all my troubles, Sarah. You have so much pressure on your shoulders already, and honestly, this way I finally have some money to stand on my own 2 feet, to finally be independent. Independent? By liquidating our shared history, our father's legacy? The sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy of her words stole my breath. "How much did they give you, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet now, stripped bare of warmth, leaving only cold fury. "How much cash did you get for Dad's memory?" "For my childhood?" She mumbled a figure, a sickeningly low number, even lower than I could have fathomed, confirming what Jessica's later research would reveal. A predatory price, barely enough to cover the hidden second mortgage she'd apparently taken out months prior, let alone provide any real independence. Then, the final, unforgivable deflection. "It wasn't nearly enough, Sarah. They really took advantage of my situation. But what else could I possibly do? Maybe if things hadn't been quite so tight financially for so long, maybe if you truly understood how expensive everything has gotten back here." Blaming me. Again. Always. For her catastrophic choices, her deceit, her betrayal of everything Dad stood for. The last fragile thread of filial connection didn't just snap, it disintegrated into dust. I ended the call, not slamming the phone down in anger, but disconnecting with a chilling, deliberate precision that felt like closing a coffin lid. I immediately redialed Michael. No more pleading, no more questioning, only ice-cold certainty. "She sold it, weeks ago, to an LLC. She's still living there. You knew. Did you take money from her?" Cornered, with no wiggle room left, he crumbled completely, the story pouring out in a torrent of pathetic excuses and mumbled apologies. Yes, she sold it about 5 weeks ago. Yes, the buyers were some out-of-state investment LLC. Yes, she gave him $5,000 cash from the meager proceeds. She said it was an early inheritance, Sarah, I swear. Yes, he knew she hadn't told me. Yes, she was still living there, supposedly apartment hunting, but mostly just dragging her feet, living in limbo in a house that wasn't legally hers anymore. He sounded wretched, pathetic, full of justifications about needing the money desperately for overdue rent and car payments, about being afraid to cross Mom, about how she'd sworn she was going to tell me herself, any day now. His weakness, his willing complicity born of convenience and cowardice, felt almost as profound, as sickening, a betrayal as Mom's active deceit. He hadn't just stood by, he'd profited and lied. The path forward, previously obscured by disbelief and grief, now stretched before me, stark and unavoidable. This wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about reclaiming agency, about refusing to be the collateral damage in their lifelong pattern of dysfunction and deceit. This required decisive, strategic action. I called Jessica again, my voice trembling but resolute. "Jess, it's confirmed. She sold it weeks ago to an LLC, but she's still squatting there like a ghost. Michael knew, took money. I need that lawyer you mentioned, and I need to book a flight home. Now." Fabricating the critical family health emergency story for my director at Shelter Build felt like another layer of surrealism, but it secured my immediate compassionate leave. The long flight back across the Pacific was a blur of numb anger, churning grief, and the hardening steel of resolve. Jessica met me at the Columbus airport, her unwavering presence a small island of sanity in the emotional wreckage. We drove straight to her small, cluttered apartment, which instantly became my sanctuary and war room. I deliberately avoided driving anywhere near Elm Street, needing distance to think clearly, to strategize, and most importantly, to marshal my resources, emotional and financial, for the inevitable counteroffensive. Mark Harrison, the attorney Jessica recommended, was exactly the ally I needed. Sharp, pragmatic, experienced in complex property disputes, and utterly unsentimental about family drama interfering with legal rights. After absorbing the entire sordid timeline, the hidden debts, the secret second mortgage Jessica uncovered, the suspiciously low sale price to the out-of-state LLC, Brenda's continued occupancy, Michael's complicity. He laid out the options with cool precision. Challenging the validity of the original sale based on potential fraud, undue influence, or Mom's possible financial incompetence was an option, he conceded, but likely a protracted, expensive, and emotionally draining legal battle with no guaranteed positive outcome. The faster, more definitive, albeit financially painful route: buy the house back from the LLC before they could list it or start renovations, seize control. His approach to Maple Valley Property Investments LLC was a masterclass in strategic negotiation. Acting solely as the representative for my newly formed, anonymous Ohio-based entity, Maple Creek Holdings LLC, the irony wasn't lost on me, he bypassed any mention of my personal connection or the troubled family history. He reached out directly to their registered agent, speaking their transactional language: profit and efficiency. He discovered through discreet inquiries that Maple Valley had indeed allowed Brenda to remain temporarily, likely viewing her as a potential short-term renter to offset holding costs or simply not prioritizing her removal while they assessed the property and planned their flip strategy. Mark's pitch was tailored perfectly. His client, Maple Creek Holdings LLC, had a strong, immediate, and sentimental interest in acquiring that specific Elm Street property. He spun a convincing tale about it being adjacent to another property his client owned, crucial for a planned expansion, and was prepared to make a swift, attractive, all-cash offer, significantly above Maple Valley's initial purchase price. This would allow them to pocket a substantial, guaranteed profit immediately without incurring any holding costs, renovation expenses, or realtor commissions. My client prioritizes speed, privacy, and a hassle-free closing above all else, Mark emphasized, playing directly into their high-volume, quick-turnaround business model. We knew it was a gut-wrenching gamble. We were essentially offering a premium price, my life savings, to buy back my own stolen inheritance from the very people who had profited from my mother's desperation and deceit. But the alternative, engaging in a potentially years-long legal slugfest with no certainty of success, while strangers possibly gutted my father's beloved house, erasing his presence forever, was simply unthinkable. The LLC predictably focused solely on their ROI, saw a golden opportunity for an effortless windfall. They barely negotiated, countering only slightly higher to maximize their gain. Mark, playing the role of the pragmatic advisor to his impatient client, engaged in a brief documented email exchange before, reluctantly, advising Maple Creek Holdings LLC, i.e., me, to accept their final price to secure the desired property quickly, wiring the astronomical sum, virtually every penny I had painstakingly saved over 15 years of diligent work and frugal living, supplemented by a sickeningly large personal loan secured against my future earnings, the weight of which felt like a physical burden, was one of the most difficult, counterintuitive actions of my life. Selling my father's house behind my back was an act of profound maternal betrayal. Buying it back under these predatory circumstances felt like a Pyrrhic victory at best, paid for with my entire financial security and future freedom. Yet, when Mark Harrison called a few days later to confirm the deal had officially closed, the title legally recorded under Maple Creek Holdings, LLC, the wave of emotion that washed over me wasn't joy, but a fierce, almost primal, possessive relief. The house was mine again, legally, unequivocally mine. And my mother, Brenda Chen, currently residing within its walls, unaware of this transaction, was now, in the cold eyes of the law, an unauthorized occupant in my property. The stage was meticulously set for the final unavoidable act. Mark then briefed me on the eviction process, his tone professionally detached, but his eyes holding a flicker of understanding for the personal toll this was taking. Given the specific circumstances here, the documented sale, her receipt of proceeds implying intent to vacate, her lack of any formal lease agreement with either the previous owner or your LLC, and her continued occupancy without legal basis, we can strongly argue for an expedited eviction process, he explained calmly, citing relevant Ohio statutes. Standard eviction procedures can drag on for weeks, even months, involving multiple court filings. However, I believe we have solid legal grounds to enforce a 7-day notice to quit in this particular situation. It's legally aggressive, he acknowledged, but entirely justifiable given the facts. It minimizes the time she has to potentially damage the property or further complicate matters. 7 days, from blissful ignorance, on her part, to legally mandated departure. It felt both impossibly cruel on a human level and ruthlessly efficient on a legal one. It felt necessary, a clean, sharp break. The confrontation took place on a crisp Wednesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the closing, the kind of bright, clear autumn day Dad would have spent happily working in the yard. I drove to Elm Street, Mark Harrison sitting composedly beside me in the passenger seat, the official notarized documents resting ominously in a neat manila folder on my lap. Jessica, my unwavering rock, insisted on being nearby, parking her familiar blue sedan discreetly down the block, a silent promise of backup if needed. Walking up that familiar flagstone path, each stone seemingly etched with a specific childhood memory. A scraped knee, a lost tooth, waiting for the school bus, felt like stepping onto the set of a surreal, tragic play. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic symphony of dread, grief, righteous anger, and a strange, chilling sense of detached purpose. This had to be done. I took a deep, steadying breath and rang the doorbell, the familiar two-tone chime echoing unnaturally loudly in the suddenly contested space. The door swung open after a moment, and there stood Brenda, my mother. Surprise flickered across her face at seeing me standing unexpectedly on her doorstep, quickly replaced by a guarded, calculating expression. She hadn't expected me back from Vietnam so soon, if ever. "Sarah, what on earth are you doing here?" No welcoming embrace offered this time, no feigned tears. Michael hovered awkwardly in the hallway behind her, looking pale and cornered, like a trapped animal. The house behind them felt stagnant, filled with the inertia of someone not planning on going anywhere soon. A few half-hearted packing boxes were stacked in a corner, clearly more for show than actual progress. She was stalling, living in a self-created limbo, within walls that no longer belonged to her. "I know you sold the house, Mom," I stated, my voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of finality, cutting through any potential pretense. "I was going to tell you, Sarah, I swear, I just needed the right time," she started, automatically launching into the well-rehearsed litany of excuses. "And I know who owns it now," I interrupted, my gaze steady, unwavering. I stepped slightly aside then, a deliberate, symbolic gesture, allowing Mark Harrison, professional and authoritative in his dark suit, to move forward beside me. "Mrs. Chen," Mark began, his tone polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. "My name is Mark Harrison. I am the attorney representing Maple Creek Holdings, LLC, the current legal owner of this property, located at 123 Elm Street, Maple Creek, Ohio, effective as of this past Monday, October 23rd. He opened the folder with deliberate care and presented the official, recorded deed bearing the LLC's name, along with the finalized title, Transfer Documents. Brenda stared blankly at the papers, then at Mark's impassive face, then finally, her wide, disbelieving eyes swung back to me, dawning horror and panicked comprehension warring for dominance. "You... Maple Creek Holdings? You bought it?" she whispered, her voice cracking, the carefully constructed facade of the wronged victim shattering into a million pieces. How could you?" Where did you even get the money? You can't just... I looked directly into my mother's eyes then, searching for any flicker of the woman who had rocked me to sleep, who had bandaged my childhood scrapes, any sign of remorse or understanding, and finding absolutely nothing recognizable. Only shock morphing into raw, incredulous outrage and the dawning, terrified realization of her complete powerlessness. "You sold my past, Mom," I repeated, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth she had systematically extinguished. "I just bought it back." Then, with a steady hand that didn't betray the tremor deep inside, I reached into Mark's folder and took out the final fateful document, the legal, unambiguous 7-day notice to quit. I held it out to her, the crisp paper feeling heavy with consequence. "And this," I stated, my voice gaining a chilling edge of authority I didn't know I possessed, "is a legal notice requiring you to vacate these premises entirely within 7 calendar days. 7 days." The words hung in the charged air like suspended particles of dust. Brenda snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes scanning it wildly, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The color drained completely from her face, leaving it pasty and drawn, then flooded back in a mottled, furious red. 7 days? 7 days? That's impossible. That's completely illegal. I'm your mother. You can't possibly throw me out onto the street like common trash. Not in 7 miserable days. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? The victim act evaporated instantly, replaced by screeching, panicked rage and cornered desperation. Michael looked physically ill now, backing away further into the shadows of the hallway. "The notice is perfectly legal and fully binding under Ohio Revised Code Section 1923.04, Mrs. Chen," Mark Harrison stated calmly but firmly, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "We strongly advise you to secure alternative housing immediately. Failure to vacate the premises entirely by noon next Wednesday, October 31st, will result in formal eviction proceedings being initiated with the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, and you may be held liable for associated costs." "You heartless, unnatural bitch," Brenda screamed, finally abandoning all pretense of maternal feeling, her face contorted with pure venom as she lunged towards me, hands clawed. Mark instantly stepped between us, a solid, immovable barrier. "Your father, your sainted father would spit on you for doing this to me. He would be utterly ashamed." I didn't flinch, didn't react to the bile. The poisoned words designed to inflict maximum pain. I simply held her blazing gaze for one long, final, severing moment, seeing not the mother I had loved and lost, but a desperate, broken stranger standing defiantly in my father's house. Then, without another word, Mark and I turned, deliberately, shoulder to shoulder, and walked away down the familiar flagstone path, leaving her shrieking threats, curses, and impotent accusations that bounced off the closing front door like poisoned darts, failing to find their mark. The battle was over. The grueling siege had just begun. That week was 7 days of psychological warfare, condensed into an unbearable, time-distorted pressure cooker. Brenda, stripped of her victim narrative and faced with undeniable legal reality, didn't go quietly into the night. She unleashed a full-scale campaign of emotional blackmail and attempted manipulation, aimed squarely at breaking my resolve. There were the tearful, increasingly frantic voicemails left on Mark Harrison's office line as I'd blocked her number, pleading poverty, sudden mysterious illnesses, and imminent homelessness. "You're really doing this, Sarah? Putting your own mother out on the street in the cold, right before the holidays. Do you have any shred of human decency left in your heart?" Then, alternating with the tears, came the angry, accusatory calls, filled with vitriol and a breathtakingly distorted version of history. "I slaved away my entire life raising you, sacrificed everything. This is the gratitude I get? You always were a selfish, cold-hearted child, just like your father sometimes." She mobilized the flying monkeys, enlisting relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. my overly dramatic Aunt Carol, my sanctimonious Uncle Gene, who dutifully called Mark Harrison's office and somehow got Jessica's number, calling her too, to deliver unsolicited judgmental lectures about the sanctity of family, the importance of forgiveness. Blood is thicker than water, Sarah. Remember that. And the terrible optics of a successful young woman like you, turfing her poor, elderly mother out onto the unforgiving street. They conveniently omitted, or perhaps were never told, the inconvenient truths about the hidden debts, the secret second mortgage, the fire sale, the deception, and the betrayal. Brenda even tried, ridiculously, contacting Shelter Build International's headquarters via their public website, attempting to lodge some sort of complaint against me for unprofessional conduct and lack of family values. But thankfully, their HR department, likely sensing a messy domestic dispute, politely but firmly directed her back to my attorney. I held firm, though each manipulative attempt felt like another small stab wound. It took every ounce of my willpower not to buckle under the societal pressure and ingrained filial guilt. I stayed hidden away at Jessica's apartment, refusing all direct contact, knowing any conversation would only devolve into more lies, more manipulation, more emotional blackmail. Mark Harrison became my shield, fielding every call, every email, every desperate plea or veiled threat with cool legal precision. His responses unwavering. The 7-day notice was legally sound, non-negotiable, and the deadline was absolute. Jessica became my anchor, talking me off the emotional ledge countless times, reminding me forcefully and repeatedly of the depth of Brenda's betrayal and why establishing this excruciatingly painful boundary was not just justified, but essential for my own survival. Staying physically away from the house, from Elm Street, from the tangible reminders of what was happening, was crucial for maintaining my resolve. Michael, surprisingly, became a grudging, almost invisible facilitator in his mother's unwilling departure. He didn't contact me directly, but Mark reported that Michael called his office twice more that week, sounding utterly broken and subdued. He didn't make excuses for Mom this time. He simply asked, his voice thick with shame, for practical information, contact details for local emergency housing shelters. Just in case, he'd mumbled. Names of affordable moving companies that worked on short notice, information on low-cost storage units. According to Mark, he sounded like someone finally, belatedly, attempting to clean up a mess he had helped create. It didn't excuse his earlier complicity or silence, not by a long shot, but it was a tiny, unexpected flicker of responsibility in the overwhelming darkness. Mark relayed the requested information without comment. On the 7th day, exactly 1 week to the hour after I had served the notice, I returned to Elm Street at 12:30 p.m. The deadline had passed. I wasn't alone. Mark Harrison was beside me, his briefcase containing all necessary legal documentation, and parked visibly, deliberately, across the street this time was a Franklin County Sheriff's deputy's cruiser, a grim but necessary precaution Mark had arranged to ensure the peaceful transfer of possession and prevent any last-minute drama or refusal to leave. Seeing the official vehicle there, its presence underscoring the tragic failure of family, felt like another surreal layer added to this domestic nightmare. The front lawn was a disaster zone. It looked like the aftermath of a frantic, disorganized yard sale. Boxes were haphazardly taped shut, some splitting open. Garbage bags overflowed with discarded belongings, random pieces of unwanted furniture, a chipped end table, a lamp with no shade, a stained armchair, were scattered forlornly across the grass. Brenda was still there, standing rigidly on the porch, haggard and visibly exhausted, her face a tight mask of simmering resentment and cold fury. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, replaced by a brittle, silent bitterness. She didn't speak to me, didn't even acknowledge my presence with a glance. She supervised Michael, who looked equally wretched and avoided my eyes entirely as he struggled to cram the last few bags and a lopsided floor lamp into his ancient, overflowing sedan. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, years of resentment, and the deafening silence of severed bonds. Finally, the car was loaded beyond capacity. Brenda threw one last contemptuous look, not at me, but at the house itself, then got into the passenger seat without a backward glance and stared straight ahead, her profile rigid. Michael, shoulders slumped in defeat, got behind the wheel and pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a scattering of unwanted debris on the lawn and the invisible, irreparable wreckage of our family in his rearview mirror. Watching them drive off down Elm Street, turning the corner and disappearing from view, wasn't the cathartic release I might have expected. There was no sense of triumph, no satisfaction, no joy, only a profound, hollow emptiness. The feeling of a necessary amputation having been performed, leaving behind phantom pain and the certainty that things could never be whole again. The chapter wasn't just closed. The entire volume of my life as I knew it had been slammed shut, violently and irrevocably. Stepping back inside the house after Mark had done a quick, professional walkthrough to confirm it was indeed vacated and secured, felt like entering a time capsule that had been abruptly violated. The silence was absolute now, profound, broken only by the sound of my own unsteady breathing and the frantic beating of my own heart. The familiar, comforting scent of lemon polish, old wood, and something indefinably Dad, maybe pipe tobacco, maybe sawdust, maybe just his quiet presence, still lingered faintly beneath the surface smells of dust and desertion. Sunlight streamed through the grimy kitchen window, illuminating the empty spaces where familiar furniture used to be, casting long shadows across the bare floorboards. Mark did a final check, confirmed the utilities were still connected, transferred to my LLC's name, and officially handed me the newly cut keys before departing, leaving me alone with the ghosts, the echoes, and the overwhelming quiet. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. In the living room, I ran my hand over the dusty mantelpiece above the fireplace, tracing the lighter rectangle where Dad's favorite landscape painting used to hang. Upstairs, in my old childhood bedroom, the walls still bore the faint outlines where posters had been taped decades ago. In Dad's basement workshop, I found one of his forgotten wood chisels lying on the bench, its handle worn smooth by his grip, and the sight brought fresh tears to my eyes. The emotional toll of the past few weeks, the past few years really, felt immense, a crushing weight on my chest. The financial strain was equally daunting. My savings decimated, saddled with a new loan, facing the costs of repairs and refurnishing this empty shell. But standing here, in the quiet heart of my father's legacy, the house he built with love and integrity, reclaimed from the brink of erasure by deceit and desperation, felt undeniably right, painfully, expensively, heartbreakingly right. It felt necessary. It felt like the only possible path forward, the only way to honor him and salvage my own sense of self from the wreckage. The relationship with my mother is severed beyond repair. Acknowledging that truth feels like accepting a death. There is no rebuilding trust after a betrayal of this magnitude. With Michael, the future is less certain, shrouded in the fog of his weakness, his complicity, and his belated, perhaps genuine, remorse. He called my new phone last night, the number only Jessica and Mark have. He left a halting, awkward voicemail message, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and misery. Said he helped Mom move into a tiny, depressing furnished room she found to rent across town in a rundown complex. Said she's not doing great. Said he feels like total shit about his role in everything, about not standing up to her, about taking the money, about lying to me. He asked again, his voice thick with something that sounded like genuine contrition. If maybe, someday, way down the road, when the dust settles, if I could ever find it in me to just talk. Not necessarily forgive, he stammered, but just talk. You're still my sister, Sarah, were his last choked words before hanging up abruptly. He is still my brother, my only sibling, linked by blood and shared history, however tarnished. And so, amidst the profound silence and echoing emptiness of this reclaimed, wounded house, I face another choice, less legally clear-cut, but perhaps even more emotionally complex. What should I do about Michael? A, talk to Michael, eventually. Family ties, however damaged and dysfunctional, are complex. He failed you profoundly, benefited from the betrayal, and actively lied. But his remorse seems genuine, unlike Mom's persistent denial and blame-shifting. Perhaps after a significant period of healing and establishing firm boundaries for yourself, opening a cautious line of communication could be part of your own recovery process. Understanding his perspective, his weakness, even if you can never fully excuse or trust him again, might offer some form of difficult closure. Keep the door slightly ajar, not for him necessarily, but for your own potential peace down the line. B, keep your distance from Michael indefinitely. He made his choices. He chose complicity, silence, and personal gain over loyalty and honesty. Forgiveness, even if possible someday, does not require reconciliation or inviting that weakness back into your life. You need to prioritize your own emotional safety and financial recovery. Protect your hard-won peace. Rebuilding your life requires focusing forward, not getting perpetually dragged back into the toxic undertow of your family's dysfunction through him. Cut ties completely, cleanly, and finally for your own well-being and future.